It's almost funny. The moment someone raises their voice, throws around big confident words, or puffs themselves up like some territorial bird, most of us instinctively feel pressure to respond, to prove we're not weak, to defend our point, to show we're right. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The instant you get pulled into that game, you've already lost. Not because you're wrong, not because they're smarter, but because the moment you argue on their terms, you hand them exactly what they need to beat you. And Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He realized something most people still haven't caught on to. If someone can drag you into an argument, they're controlling the battlefield. And the person who controls the battlefield doesn't have to be right. They just have to make you react. That's the trick. You win not by overpowering someone, but by refusing to stand where they expect you to. It's like trying to fight a shadow. You throw punches and it just moves around you, making you look ridiculous while it slips behind your guard. But here's the twist that makes this idea genuinely life-changing. Machiavelli didn't encourage silence because he believed in being passive. He encouraged silence because it forces your opponent to fight the air. People hate that. They crave validation through conflict. They want you to push back so they can justify pushing harder. They want you to lose your temper so they can feel superior. And when you don't play into that, it disrupts them in a way they can't quite explain. Think about the last time someone came at you aggressively. Maybe they tried to corner you with a sarcastic remark. Maybe they made a comment they knew would get under your skin. Or maybe they acted offended, fake or real, just to provoke a reaction. Imagine if, instead of defending yourself or firing back, you simply let their words land and chose not to pick them up. Not dismissively, not submissively, just neutrally, casual, as if what they said had no real weight. That's when something interesting happens. Most people expect confrontation to work like a button, push it, and the other person reacts. It's predictable. But when the button does nothing, they feel this weird disconnect, like their emotional momentum suddenly has nowhere to go. They're forced to sit with their own tension, and if they were trying to score a win at your expense, they end up feeling like they lost, without you ever lifting a finger. Machiavelli observed that arguing rarely improves your position. If anything, it broadcasts your vulnerability. When you argue, you reveal what bothers you, what you fear, what you value, and what you struggle to defend. You turn your inner world into an open book, and once people know your pressure points, they can press them whenever they want. But when you stay composed, genuinely composed, not the fake calm that cracks under pressure, you become unreadable, unpredictable, and that alone shifts power in your direction. There's also something subtle here that most people overlook. An argument isn't just about words, it's about identity. When someone tries to start a fight, they're usually trying to force you into a specific role, the one who's wrong, or weak, or defensive. They want to define the story for you, but when you don't accept the role they wrote for you, they're stuck. It's like directing a play and your lead actor just walks off stage. Suddenly the script doesn't work anymore. This is why some of the most influential people in history barely argued. They made statements, observations, or decisions, and then let others exhaust themselves, trying to decode or debate them. Confidence often looks like stillness. Silence creates pressure because people project meaning onto it, and when someone projects, they reveal far more than they realize. But here's where this becomes practical. Silence alone isn't the move. Indifference alone isn't the move. The real trick is strategic disengagement, remaining steady while directing the energy of the situation somewhere useful. There's an art to it. For example, imagine someone accuses you of something exaggerated or tries to bait you with an insult. Instead of defending yourself, you might respond with a question, a calm one, something that makes them unpack what they said. Questions force clarity, and clarity exposes weak arguments. Suddenly they're the ones doing the talking, explaining, justifying, backtracking, filling the silence. They burn their own fuel. You stay centered. Another variation is to shift the conversation to a neutral third point, something factual or procedural, not in a dismissive way, but in a way that takes the emotional fire out of the exchange. Emotional arguments burn hot, but fast. They depend on immediate engagement. If you redirect even slightly, the spark dies. Most aggressors don't know how to handle conversations that don't go the way they rehearsed in their head. One of the best examples of this, though rarely discussed, is when someone throws a passive-aggressive comment your way. A lot of people snap. A lot of people over-explain. But the Machiavellian move is completely different. You treat it as if it were literal, as if no hidden meaning existed. Passive aggression only works when both sides silently acknowledge the tension. But if you strip the tension away by responding to the surface meaning, the hidden dagger becomes blunt. The other person suddenly has to either confront their real intention openly or let the moment die. Most choose to let it die. Now, here's something important. This isn't about suppressing your voice or pretending things don't bother you. It's about choosing when and how you engage, so you don't hand your influence over for free. You're not avoiding conflict, you're guiding it. Direct confrontation is rarely the smartest move, not because you can't win, but because the cost of winning is usually higher than the prize. Machiavelli believed that the appearance of strength was often more valuable than the use of strength, and nothing creates that appearance more reliably than unshakable composure. When people can't faze you, they start interpreting that as resilience, confidence, or even superiority. Even if you're just working on staying grounded internally, people read behavior, not thoughts. And here's the strange part that most people never expect. When you refuse to argue, when you stay calm while someone else gets emotional, others around you notice. They may not say anything, but they feel the contrast. They instinctively trust the person who looks stable more than the person who looks chaotic. You don't just win the moment, you win the room. The real power in never arguing isn't about silence, it's about direction. When you refuse to let someone pull you into their battlefield, you create your own, and people are always weaker on ground they didn't choose. The word. Next part. Power in this isn't loud or flashy. It's subtle, almost invisible in the moment, but it compounds. Every time you stay centered while someone else tries to provoke you, you build this quiet reputation, first in their mind, then in everyone else's. They start hesitating before challenging you, not because they fear you, but because they can't predict you. And unpredictability is one of the strongest shields you can have in any social environment. But the deeper you go into this, the more you realize something strange. Most arguments aren't actually about the topic being debated. They're about status, insecurity, fear, ego, frustration, or a need for control. The topic is just the surface layer that people use, so they don't have to admit what the conflict is actually about. And Machiavelli understood that the person who takes the topic at face value, the one who argues literally, always loses to the person who sees the emotional game underneath. Because the emotional game determines the outcome, not the logic. Let's say someone challenges your idea in front of others. The literal debate is about the idea, but the emotional game is about who looks competent, who looks confident, who controls the room. If you rush to defend yourself, even if you're right, it signals insecurity. Why are you scrambling? Why are you so desperate to prove anything? Your reaction gives them leverage they haven't actually earned. But imagine instead, you take a breath, pause, and consider. That pause alone often shifts things. It shows you're not threatened, not hurried, not destabilized. You're thinking, deliberating. That's a kind of silent dominance people feel without knowing why. And if you respond with a calm, curious question, something like asking them to clarify their reasoning or explain their alternative, you've flipped the dynamic. Now they're the ones who have to perform. They're under the spotlight they tried to place on you. And once they start talking, you'll notice how often their argument falls apart. under its own weight. Why? Because most people don't challenge to improve anything. They challenge to elevate themselves. And ego-driven challenges rarely hold up under pressure. Another powerful example: when someone tries to embarrass you with a joke, most people feel the instinctive pull to fire back, to protect their pride, to show they're not easy to mess with. But the moment you retaliate, now it's a duel. You're playing their game. However, if you simply smile, or nod, or even tease yourself a little, but without tension, something fascinating happens. They lose the emotional fuel of the moment. The crowd senses it too. Instead of looking like you've been undermined, you end up looking like someone who's above the whole exchange. It signals self-possession, and people gravitate toward that. Machiavelli wrote that it's better to appear unshaken than to win a heated exchange, because the appearance lasts longer. A verbal win fades fast. The impression you leave does not. But the most important application of this idea isn't with strangers or enemies. It's with the people closest to you. Arguments in relationships often escalate because both sides are reacting to each other's emotional impulses rather than the underlying need. When you refuse to argue, not by shutting down, but by staying grounded, you create space for understanding. You don't trigger the other person's defenses. You don't pour fuel on the fire. You give the conversation a chance to become productive instead of destructive. And you'd be surprised how much people open up when they feel you're not trying to beat them, but understand them. Now, there's something you should know. This approach takes practice. It's not about pretending to be calm. Pretending cracks. It's about training yourself to pause, step back, and look at the intention behind the argument. Ask yourself what the other person is really trying to get. Validation, power, respect, attention. Once you see that, the emotional pull of the argument weakens. You can be present without being pulled in. You can be engaged without being reactive. And let's be honest, most arguments aren't worth winning. Even if you win the words, you lose time, energy, and sometimes relationships. You might also change how others perceive you, especially if you become emotional in the process. The long-term cost is rarely worth the short-term satisfaction. But refusing to argue doesn't mean letting disrespect slide. That's a misunderstanding. You can set boundaries calmly. You can correct someone without raising your voice. You can state your position without debating. You can say no without defending it. In fact, boundaries are strongest when they're delivered without emotional heat. When you say something firmly and simply, it tends to stick. Here's a powerful tactic that aligns perfectly with Machiavelli's approach. When someone pushes you, instead of pushing back, give them clarity, not justification, clarity. A simple grounded statement of your position without extra explanation. Explanations invite debate. Clarity ends it. Something like, "That's not going to work for me," or "I don't see it that way," or "I hear you, but I'm choosing differently." Short, steady, and final. You're not arguing, you're informing. And when people realize they can't pull you into a fight, they adjust how they approach you. Eventually, your calm becomes a kind of unspoken authority. It feels more real than the loudest voice in the room. Because loudness tries to force belief, calmness earns it. And here's the part that catches people off guard. Once you master the art of never arguing, you start seeing arguments everywhere. Not as battles, but as invitations. Invitations to give away your power. Invitations to step into someone else's narrative. Invitations to validate someone's insecurity. And you realize you don't have to accept any of them. You can choose your ground. You can choose your timing. You can choose which conflicts deserve your energy. And that choice itself is influence. Most people think power comes from dominance. Machiavelli knew power often comes from restraint. A person who can control themselves can't control others. But someone who controls themselves fully, who can stand in chaos without getting swept into it, has a presence that changes the temperature of a room. The funny thing is, once you start practicing this, you'll notice how quickly people who used to push your buttons lose interest. The game stops being fun for them. There's no payoff, no reaction. They move on. And the people who respect your steadiness, they stick around. They open up. They trust you more. You stop living in the world of petty battles, and you start living in the world of strategic choices. And once that shift happens, you begin to understand why Machiavelli emphasized influence over victory, perception over noise, and strategy over impulse. You don't need to argue to win. You need to understand the game well enough that arguing isn't even necessary. And the moment you master that, you become someone very few people know how to handle, because they can't drag you where they feel strongest, and they can't get you to play by rules you never agreed to. They're left standing on a battlefield you walked away from a long time ago, holding weapons that suddenly feel useless, wondering why none of them seem to work on you anymore. That's the moment you realize you've stopped losing and quietly started winning. And the irony is, the less you argue, the more your words start to matter. When someone who's constantly reactive speaks, people tune them out. It's noise. Predictable, emotional, repetitive noise. But when someone who rarely raises their voice finally offers an opinion, the room tilts toward them. People listen harder. They assume there's weight behind the words, because you've trained them, through your behavior, not to expect empty reactions. You've built value through scarcity. This is one of Machiavelli's sharpest insights. Your influence grows when you don't waste it. Every unnecessary argument drains a little of your authority, even if you think you're winning. And every moment of composure adds to it. You're not just controlling the situation, you're controlling how others perceive you long term. That consistency is magnetic, and it's rare. People remember it. But there's a deeper layer to this that's even more interesting. When you stop arguing reactively, your mind gets quieter. You start seeing things more clearly. People's intentions, their patterns, their insecurities, their tells. It becomes obvious who's honest and who's manipulative, who's insecure and who's pretending, who's trying to provoke you and who's just speaking from their own wound. Arguments cloud your perception with adrenaline. Composure sharpens it. Imagine sitting across from someone who's trying to stir emotion in you. Before, you might have taken the bait without thinking. But now, you watch, you observe. You notice how their voice tightens when they talk about certain topics, or how they repeat themselves when they want validation, or how they poke at others to cover their own fragility. Suddenly, instead of being a participant in the argument, you're almost an analyst of it. You're outside of the chaos, not inside it. It changes the entire dynamic, because now you're responding, not reacting. Your choices become deliberate, and that alone gives you an advantage most people never even realize exists. Some people will test you harder once they notice this. Humans push boundaries. We do it subconsciously, especially when someone shifts a dynamic we're used to. When people see you becoming more composed, they may push a little more aggressively, at least at first. A sharper comment, a louder tone, a guilt trip, a sarcastic jab, delivered with a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. It's not because they want to break you. Most aren't even aware they're doing it. It's because they're recalibrating their mental model of you. They're seeing if the change is real or temporary. And when you don't break, when you stay centered through the stronger push, something clicks for them. They stop trying. Their mind updates its understanding of who you are and where the limits are. The tests fade away, interactions become smoother, and the relationship, ironically, improves, even if it felt tense at first, because people trust consistent strength more than emotional volatility. Here's something else Machiavelli observed. People expect power to look aggressive, loud, forceful. They're often blindsided when it shows up in the form of restraint. It's unsettling for them, because they can't figure out what you're thinking or what you want. And when people can't decode you easily, they don't know how to attack you effectively. Most conflict relies on predictability, but a person who doesn't argue is unpredictable, not chaotic, but unreadable in a way that keeps others off balance. That's why this approach gives you an edge in every area of life: work, relationships, friendships, negotiations, even casual conversations. Anywhere there's ego, competition, or insecurity, the one who stays calm guides the interaction. But there's a subtle point here that's easy to miss. Staying calm doesn't mean staying distant. In fact, when done right, it can make you more connected to others. Because you're not stuck in your head trying to defend yourself. You're actually more present. You hear what people are really saying. You notice the meaning behind their words. You respond thoughtfully instead of impulsively. That presence feels like respect to others, even if you're simultaneously holding your boundary, and people lean toward it. There's also a hidden social advantage to this. When you refuse to argue emotionally, people instinctively see you as someone who chooses their battles wisely, someone who doesn't need to prove themselves, someone who has their own inner compass. And people admire that, even if they don't say it. It stands out in a world where everyone is trying to win every tiny disagreement, where arguments erupt over things that don't even matter. But let's talk about when an argument actually does matter, because avoiding pointless conflict is not the same as avoiding meaningful confrontation. There will be moments in life when you need to stand firm, when someone crosses a line, when a situation demands clarity, when silence would allow harm. And that's precisely why mastering this approach is so powerful. If you seldom argue, then when you finally do speak with firmness, people feel the shift immediately. They know it's serious. They know you've thought it through. They know you're not acting from emotion. You're acting from principle. That's the kind of presence that changes outcomes. That's the kind of presence people listen to. Think of it like a lion that almost never roars. When it finally does, the entire savannah pays attention. Not because the roar is louder, but because it's rare. The mistake most people make is roaring at every rustle, every disagreement, every perceived slight. They drain their power by using it constantly. The Machiavellian approach is different. It's about storing your fire so that when you release it, it matters. And here's the final twist that brings all of this together. When you stop arguing, you stop living reactively. Your life stops being shaped by external provocations. Your emotions stop being dictated by someone else's tone or accusations. You begin choosing your responses, your boundaries, your direction. You become the one steering interactions, not the one being tossed around by them. That's why the people who argue the least often end up with the most control. Not because they dominate others, but because they mastered themselves. And once you master yourself, very few people can truly influence you without your permission. They can try, they can push, they can test, but you won't be moved unless you choose to move. That's the real victory Machiavelli was hinting at. A win that doesn't require a fight, a dominance that doesn't require aggression, a presence that doesn't need noise to be felt. Because the strongest person in any room isn't the one who argues the most. It's the one who doesn't need to.